There is a new study out, a new study that shows that eating ultra-processed foods are putting us all at risk of early death. In fact, what we're facing right now is actually a 14% higher risk of all-cause mortality with each 10% increase in the amount of ultra-processed foods we eat. And we want to drill down on this, so we've asked Michelle Greenstein, our correspondent, to get us some information on this. Okay, let's start with the basics, okay? A lot of people here, you know, when it comes to this kind of stuff, we hear all these terms all the time, and it makes us all crazy, right? So let's define the term. We said ultra-processed foods. What is that?
So the researchers in this study defined ultra-processed food as any food that's been manufactured industrially. So not an apple you pick off the tree, right? Anything with multiple ingredients, usually with additives that are added either for cosmetic purposes or technological purposes. So like the meat that you see in the grocery store, that meat has nitrates added to it to make it appealing for us, to make it look red. It really would be a kind of a grayish brown, but we know people wouldn't buy that, so we have to add that for preservative purposes. Or gummy bears, you know, the ingredients to make those gummy bears are not, you know, bright green, bright blue, bright red, etc.
So it's interesting you mentioned something like gummy bears, because we know too much sugar is bad for you.
Exactly.
But sugar in its natural state, before you bleach it and do everything else, it's kind of a natural food.
Well, no, you need to eat sugar
right?
to survive. But the problem is Americans overall tend to eat way more sugar, sodium, processed foods in general than the recommended intake. For example, Americans eat 90% of Americans, rather, eat more sodium than the recommended intake, and that leads to high blood pressure, obesity, of course, cancer, as do the ultra-processed foods, because those tend to overlap.
So it's food that they've taken and they've processed it, they've added stuff to it, some of which the food doesn't need for any nutritional reasons.
Exactly, and the reason people tend to go for these things is, of course, the convenience factor. You know, these things tend to be cheaper, even though they really shouldn't be. That has a lot to do with the lobbies in this country. And then also, of course, because of the lower price. A lot of people are strapped for time, strapped for cash. Health, unfortunately, doesn't fall high on the risk of priorities when you have 2 or 3 jobs. But another issue that I think is very significant is that doctors, by and large, in this country are not trained in nutrition. Doctors, on average, in the U.S. and in Europe, receive about 23 hours of nutrition education. So compare that to 10,000 hours that you spend in medical school, you know, 4+ years of this training.
You know, this sounds really smart, but let me just take another perspective here. There's somebody watching our show right now who doesn't have a lot of money. They maybe make $15,000 a year or something like that. Right. They have 3 children. And you know what? They could feed them with a 99-cent meal at either McDonald's or Burger King or Wendy's or something like that, right? And they get the fries and they get a little cheeseburger and they get a Coke. And if they had to go out and make that meal for their 3 children, it would be a lot more than $3 or $3.50.
Right, not to mention the cost and time and aggravation. This is highly significant.
So bad food is cheap.
Right, but this is not, as you alluded to, this is not a problem of individuals. This is not like, oh, these people are making bad choices. We need to ask ourselves, why are the products that are behind you, this bacon, egg, and cheese biscuit from McDonald's, why is that cheaper than buying
Okay, let me ask you, why is it cheaper?
Because of, so for example, let me give you one example.
All right.
The U.S. government spends $38 billion subsidizing the meat and dairy industry, okay? In terms of health, this is a terrible, terrible idea. Meat clogs your arteries. It puts you at risk for chronic inflammation, which, as you know, I know you used to be in healthcare, puts you at risk for a whole slew of other chronic diseases.
Cardiac
I mean, 30 million Americans live with are diagnosed with diabetes. A lot of cases are undiagnosed.
Subsidize, and pardon me for interrupting because we're running out of time. So they don't subsidize healthy foods.
Well, fruits and vegetables, I said 38 billion in the meat and dairy industry. Less than 1% of that is spent by the U.S. government subsidizing fruit and vegetables.
So the rest, with the exception of corn, of course, which they subsidize because they get the corn syrup.
But I gotta say, those corn subsidies, those aren't going to small farmers. Those aren't going to corn farms, right? Those are going to huge, giant corporations. And most of that corn is being used to feed cows, to feed products for the meat and dairy industry. So when they say we're helping the American farmer, no, they're helping Monsanto. No, they're not helping the small American farmer. Yeah, small farmers hate subsidies. They don't get any of them.
Good stuff. Interesting conversation. I learned something from you.
Hey YouTube, thanks for checking out our channel. We hope you enjoyed the video. We have tons of content for you just like this. For more of RT America's one-of-a-kind news and analysis, be sure to subscribe and never stop questioning more.